Redditors who ran away from or ghosted on their previous lives as an adult, what was your motivation and what is your life like now? I grew up in a small town with two best friends. The three of us were extremely tight from elementary school through our early 20s, with a brief interlude when I left for college, but it completely fell apart about 11 years ago. One of my friends was engaged with a real psychopath that liked to toy with her, and it made her toxic, insecure, and paranoid as hell. He came over one Sunday to fix my old snowblower, which I was planning to sell since I had recently moved to an apartment. I offered him a beer and he took that as an opening and tried to kiss me / feel me up aggressively. I turned him down pretty harshly but decided not to tell my friend, who was pregnant at the time and easily upset. Well, he was pissed off, turned around and told her that I tried to seduce him. Long story short, she believed him, went into an emotional tailspin, tried to self-unalive, did not succeed, and lost the baby in the process. My other friend decided no smoke without fire, and believed him as well. Word got out around my small town pretty quickly, and it felt like everyone turned on me in a heartbeat. After all, my two best lifelong friends believed I had tried to seduce one's fiancée and caused her to lose her baby. It was deemed weird that I had invited him over to fix my snowblower in the summer, even though it was because I had moved into an apartment. Even the people who weren't 100% sure who to believe stayed the hell away. It didn't matter that he had always been an a-hole and a player, and their relationship and her emotional state had been on the rocks for ages. And I was ashamed too, wondered if I had led him on in some way. Devastated for my friend, couldn't hold my head up, started avoiding people. For 2 years, I was either angry or depressed all the time. I stopped going out, lost 30 pounds, I was 130 to start with, cried all the time. It never occurred to me to seek therapy. I also never seriously considered just standing up for myself, confronting him publicly, laying it all out in the open in one big blow-up. I finally got out because a college friend of mine happened to be road tripping across the country, paid me a visit, and they were shocked at how much I'd changed. He convinced me to go out with him. I did. Turns out the only good thing about having depression and never going out to socialize for almost 2 years, except for work, was that I had a healthy savings account. It's amazing how little you spend when you stop trying to keep up appearances for others. I told my landlord I was leaving the next day, paid extra 2 months and left the deposit in exchange for him getting rid of my stuff and having the apartment cleaned. I packed my bags and left with my friend. That road trip helped remind me that there was a much bigger and brighter world out there than my crappy little town and all the drama left behind. At the end of it, I crashed at his house for 3 months before I got back on my feet. Then I got my own place, got a steady job. I was really lucky with the latter. It was the height of the recession then and the job market was rough. He and I stayed friends for 2 more years before we started dating. We've been married now for 6. 4 or 5 years into my new life, I reached out to my other friend, not the one who lost the baby. In part for closure, and part, if we're honest, due to morbid curiosity. She didn't want to talk. More than a decade of friendship, and she still didn't want to hear me out. It was really at that moment that I was able to truly leave things behind. It seems surreal, but I rarely think of that part of my life anymore. My memories of that time aren't all that sharp. Those 2 years were a blur. Sometimes I wondered what happened to them, if my former friend came out okay and got away from that guy. But it doesn't keep me up at night. I look at my life now and I'm a happy person, stable, content in my life, secure. I can honestly say now that the whole thing hasn't left any lasting trauma on me, except that I doubt if I'll ever let myself have friendships that went that deep again. I have a lot of friends, a few that are closer than others, but none super close. Except for my husband, of course. And I don't miss it, really.
We now have a Discord. Check out the server in the link in the description.
Story 2. Born and raised in my hometown in Central Florida. About 19 years old and become addicted to drugs and other opiates. About 6 years of that life and doing whatever I could to not slip into withdrawals, I decided to move as far away as I could. With my mother's help, God bless her soul. Away from any drug dealers and all of my friends. First couple months were terrible dealing with withdrawals and the depression that comes with it. But once I finally got past that slope, I was able to finally hold down a job and become an average person. It's been about 2 years since I left home and am now rebuilding my credit, 650. Got myself a girlfriend who is pretty neat. I got myself a pup that I love more than anything in this world, and overall just became a straight up normal person. And I'm extremely happy where I am in life now. I never thought I'd be on this side of addiction, and just being able to type this is crazy to me. Huge props to OP. Beating addiction is difficult, to say the least. I'm glad that OP had a good support system to help him move away from everything and you just get on track. Story 3. I left because I was the black sheep. I'm the middle child of 5, and to my parents, the other 4 siblings were more successful, perfect, smart, and just plain better than me. When I met my successful spouse, they called me a gold digger, but at the same time they were glad I was his problem now. I don't even know what I did, really. I just drew the short straw on kids whose parents can deal with them, I guess. I think my parents only had kids for show, so when teen hormones made me a bit more of a handful than my siblings, they couldn't deal with it and wrote me off. spouse had his own issues within his family. So 20 years ago, we moved to another country, barely even said goodbye. We are wildly successful now and with teen kids of our own. Even hormonal difficult ones, and guess what, Pops? I still love them to death. Family back home has been through divorce and misery since then, but not us. We're doing well. We're still in love. Life is great. Truly, the best revenge is living well. Story 4. I worked at a medical marijuana dispensary in the LA area for 6 years. One day it got raided, so that life came abruptly to an end. I had to figure out what my next move was, so I packed all my stuff into a storage locker and got on a Greyhound bus to Arizona. My mom moved to Phoenix a couple years prior, so I had a place to stay. Just no clue what I was going to do. Now I work doing inventory management and web design for a small business. I also got back into school, so I'm 1 semester away from transferring to ASU. I'm 27, but I finally made it to university. After all that time smoking weed and being the cool guy, it is very humbling to be in a town where you don't know anyone. Story 5. Let me start out by saying that I'm an idiot, and it's no wonder my life is what it is now. I abandoned my great cushy life to join the military. Left a beautiful girl, reconnected with another great lady and left her as well. Left a decent job where I was given a big pay raise and promotion. Left behind wonderful friends and family. Why? 9/11, really. Also, I was beginning to find modern life a bit empty and wanted to do something more meaningful. Then, after a decade, I left the military, left behind a great career, was respected, looked up to, and considered a rising professional in my field. They even considered me to be the top 10% of my branch. I had really found what I was looking for, but it also was incredibly stressful and lonely. But I was a frickin' machine. Just give me coffee and cigarettes and I'll turn crap around for you. So why did I leave that behind? Well, it was about a decade already. Bin Laden was dead, I decided the job was done as far as why I joined, and I wanted to reconnect with my old life. So now here I am, completely lost in my place in the world. Still find modern life empty. Struggling with PTSD, depression, anxiety, and all other sorts of crap that just kind of came into my life when my workaholic coping mechanism was gone. Using weed to manage all that, freaking great by the way, and thinking about walking from this life altogether. I'm just frickin' lost, and everything seems empty. I hear this is unfortunately pretty common for people who are ex-military. The systems set in place, at least as far as I know in Canada and the US, to transition back to civilian life just aren't really what they need to be. It's hard. It's really, really hard moving from that regimented life back to a normal life where you have to find your own way. Story 6. I had an extremely high-paying job in the UK, but was working ridiculous hours when I was in the UK and would frequently get late-night calls that I needed to be in some random country the next day for an unspecified amount of time. I had a lot of cash built up, but no social life or friends because I just couldn't maintain them with the way I was working. As a child, my parents had decided to foster 2 brothers so that I wouldn't grow up as an only child. However, the kids they ended up fostering were clinical psychopaths, formally diagnosed, and ended up in long-term secure care. One of them escaped whilst on a day trip and went to the police claiming to be me and spinning a tale about how my father had been abusing me. Without checking the story, the police arrested my dad, and one of them decided to tell the neighbors what was going on. By the time I found out and got it sorted, the story had spread around the neighborhood and kept growing with the retelling. Eventually, my dad moved back to Barbados, which has a US-style healthcare system. Before his private healthcare could kick in, he came down sick and blew through all of his savings on medical care. I stepped in and also started blowing through my savings paying for his treatment and upgrading his home to be able to support him in a wheelchair. He eventually died from complications of the treatments, and I flew out to Barbados for the last time for his funeral. He had left very strict instructions for his funeral: no fancy coffin, cremation, and remains to return to the UK, to be alongside my mother. However, his family thought differently and kept hounding his partner trying to get a ridiculously gaudy funeral. We eventually compromised and had his ashes interred in the family plot, but even then at the ceremony I had members of the family coming up to me and telling me that other family members, or even his partner, were trying to steal all of his money. When I got back to the UK, the whole thing was finally too much for me, so I quit my job and eventually moved to Australia, where I work in a much lower paying position, but I don't have any of the stress or workload, and can step out of my office to get on a tram and go down to the beach anytime I want to. Only one person connected to my family knows where I am, and even they don't know enough to find me without hiring a PI. And knowing that I'm 36 hours of travel time away from the lot of them is reassuring. Story 7. When I was 22 years old, I ghosted my PhD program. I went straight from undergrad to PhD in computer science at Georgia Tech. I had great grades and test scores, but I had no idea what I wanted to do. Before my, departure, I had a 4.0 GPA and a research assistantship, and I was absolutely miserable. I was overworked, struggling to make ends meet, clueless on what I wanted to do, no free time whatsoever, just miserable. Then one day in database theory class, I read a letter from my friend about how if I was really unhappy, just stop. Just get up wherever I was and leave. Just do it. So I did. I got up in the middle of database theory class, I walked to the door of the classroom, I dropped the textbook written by the professor who I thought was a pretty big jerk into the trash can, and it landed with a resounding thud. And then I left. Cleared out my cubicle, drove to my apartment, got a crappy second shift job so I could go job hunting in the mornings, told no one, sent no email, called no one, returned no calls, explained nothing. I've not been back to that campus in 25 years. I was in pretty bad shape at the time, with depression and general anxiety and severe anemia, all without knowing it. But I did make it through. It took about a year to find a great job that I've been at for the past 25 years. Though it took many years and a trip to the ER, I eventually got my depression, general anxiety, and anemia all addressed. It's still a balancing act. I still need help sometimes, but it's generally good. Work paid for me to get my master's degree. I like my job pretty well, and I really like my coworkers and immediate management. All in all, though it seemed like my life was falling apart at the time, it was honestly one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. This is what happens when the only thing to do in someone's mind is to pursue higher education. For so long, it was just go to school for as long as you can to learn as many things as you can and you'll get a good job. It's the boomer mentality, you know? But at some point that stopped really working, and really it never worked for everyone. So I guess when OP got shoehorned into that style of living, it's like, oh yeah, he got great grades and everything, but it just wasn't for him. I'm super glad he got out of there, and if any of you are considering doing something similar, although maybe less dramatic, depending on your situation, I would say go for it. If you're feeling lost and truly unhappy, maybe it's time to just get away. Story 8. Born and raised in a crappy little California city. Hated it. It was crowdy, noisy, polluted, and full of crime, not to mention there was a huge unemployment rate. Hopped from job to job after school, dated girl after girl, hung out with friend after friend, none of it had any lasting effect. It's like nothing was clicking no matter what I did. Hell, I thought I would be one of those empty shells that live life going through the paces, but never actually living, you know? After a while, everything was just annoying me. Girlfriends were annoying me, friends were annoying me, even family was getting on my nerves. I go on a clear my head vacation to a family member in Oregon, and goddamn it actually works. I come home to my crap apartment, take one look at my roommate, and declare, I'm done with this crap. All of it. I give my roommate 30 days notice, quit my job, tell my girlfriend to hit the road, tell all my friends to get bent, and move in just over a month. I moved here with only a tiny snapshot, but it's like it was meant to be. With my wife for over 12 years, working a great job, own a great home, happier than I've ever been. I just needed to get away from the bad juju to make it all happen. Sometimes wiping the slate clean and taking a chance on nothing but a hunch is what the soul needs. Best of luck out there to you who have done the same. Story 9. I wasn't exactly an adult at the time, but I dropped out of school at 15, and haven't seen or spoken to anybody I used to know since. I was always a good student, by no means a teacher's pet, but I never got into any trouble, and I always found schoolwork itself pretty easy without needing much effort. Then all the GCSE coursework started, and I found myself struggling with it. I understood the material no problem. I just wasn't very good at expressing it in an essay or writing up an experiment. I got caught in a vicious cycle where I was struggling, so I'd put off doing it, then because of deadlines struggle even more, so I'd put it off even more, etc. In the end, I guess I couldn't handle not being the A student I'd always been. So I refused to leave the house and for a while wouldn't talk to anybody. 13 years later, and I still live with my parents, no job, no qualifications, so no real hope of a job, no friends, and no life. Fortunately, no depression or anything, but there's just no real desire to do anything. And I just spend my days sat at home looking for something to keep me occupied. Stay in school, kids. OP says no depression, but it kind of sounds like at least minor depression to me, right? Like complete lack of motivation, just staying home, no friends? Or I guess the big indicator there seems to be like no desire to have friends? I don't know. OP can say that there's nothing going on, but I think there's something. Even if it's not depression, I think that OP should seek some counseling or something. Story 10. I only told a few people, but I picked up and moved across country mid-college career. Just dumped everyone out of the blue. My family was toxic, the guy I was living with was abusive, I felt like I needed a fresh start. I was unhappy and thought I could reinvent myself as the person I wanted to be. Turns out that with no friends or family around, toxic or otherwise, I was still the same unhappy person I was in my old town. I shrugged off the fake persona I'd been trying on and found a student therapy group to address the core reasons I was so unhappy. That was the real turning point. With healthier habits, I made new, healthier friends. I got my life in order. I managed to cobble together a decent relationship with my parents and some of my family. I got married. Things are good now. I probably didn't need to move to make the changes I did, but at the time it felt like I needed the space away from people who knew the old me. Plus, my husband was here, so if I hadn't moved, I wouldn't have met him. I'm glad I went. Story 11. Finished my service in the Peace Corps. Went home for a few days to the East Coast. Then got in my car with my dog, who I rescued and raised during my Peace Corps service and brought home with me, and the few belongings I had, and drove across country to the Midwest, to a town where I knew no one. Stayed at a random Super 8 motel because I was broke and no other places would allow dogs while I looked for a place. Felt totally overwhelmed adjusting back to American culture. It was bliss to have a shower all to myself and a bed, but I was also pretty lonely, except for the fact that I had my dog. Eventually found a room in some divorcee's basement. Did that for a while and worked some waitressing jobs. Upgraded to a house with 3 random Craigslist roommates, only one of whom had to be evicted for being a creep. Worked as a nanny and a TEFL teacher and then a sex ed teacher for Planned Parenthood. Still struggled adjusting back to life in America. Struggling with serious depression, but mostly working my butt off at multiple jobs to make ends meet. Then I applied and was accepted to law school. Did that, met my fiance there, graduated, and am now a trial attorney. Bumpy but interesting road. Wouldn't change a thing. Story 12. I was working as a salaried manager at a family-owned pizza place in town. I thought I had achieved a peak in life and was living comfortably with a roommate in a cool little pad in town. Our crew was super tight and we all hung out after work. My social life was my work life. The owner's son was the general manager and was truly something to behold. We did all his work for him while he took home an undisclosed paycheck for all his efforts. None of us liked the little brat, but put up with him because he would buy our friendship with various party favors. Fast forward 3 years and I suffered catastrophic lung failure and was hospitalized for weeks. The owner was nice enough to keep paying me while I was in the hospital, but after I got out, the son kept pushing me to get back to business as usual. About a month later, the other lung went out, and while I was in the hospital, I got a call from one of our suppliers asking for the weekly order. I knew the owner's son was with the rest of the team on a company-sponsored day on the water, but I was quite literally on a gurney headed for the operating room. I told my supplier this, but he said he tried to call the others and got no response. While I was waiting to be prepped for surgery, I placed an order that wouldn't put us absurdly overstock, but would ensure that we would have enough food to last the week. Recovery went well and I was back at work shortly thereafter. After what at that time felt like a traumatic experience, my tolerance for BS was pretty low. The son was pushing me to get back to doing his job and was showing signs of substance abuse. One of the employees even brought that to my attention. I said screw it and told the owner what was going on. 3 days later, I was fired, being told that they needed someone they could trust. I applied for unemployment but got denied on the fact that I had discussed the situation with my employee that brought their concerns to my attention. I knew that it would kill me socially since the employees couldn't be seen with me and also keep their jobs, but I didn't care. I eventually got a good corporate gig, met the woman of my dreams, and am now saving for a house to build a family in. I miss the friends I made, but I can't say I'd be better off where I was. Am I crazy, or does that job that OP had not sound good at all? Having the owner's son be the general manager is a recipe for nepotism and just garbage in a workplace, really. So first step, getting out of there. Great work, OP. That was the play for sure. Second, why did OP say, at the time it felt like a traumatic experience? Is it not? Is having lung failure not a traumatic experience? When did I miss this? And then having a second one fail a month later, come on, OP. You had a traumatic experience. You don't need to say at the time. You don't have to be tough. That's crazy, dude.